The following episode contains disturbing descriptions of child abuse and sexual violence and may not be suitable for everyone. It also contains coarse language, adult themes, and content of a violent and disturbing nature. Listener discretion is advised.
You are a rock star, a successful one at that. You've spent years honing your skills on stage, in the studio, and in that special room where you write your songs. You've endured untold rides in a broken down van, ate way too much bad food, survived plenty of bad decisions, and navigated through all the sharks that inhabit the record industry. And here you are in your palatial home with all the luxuries money can buy. You want for nothing, but you're trapped. You don't feel safe. When you become famous, the crazies come out. You're harassed in a multitude of ways. Some of these fanatics believe that they have a special connection to you. They know you, and they believe that you need to know them. Many are mostly harmless, delusional people who don't go beyond posting their obsessions over you online. You might get some letters in the mail, and when you go out in public, a few may linger a little too long and a little too closely. Are they harmless? Probably. But you can't take chances. Maybe you have a bodyguard or two to accompany you whenever you leave the house. Just in case. Then there are the more extreme situations. A few found your personal email address and keep sending you messages. Others DM you constantly on social media. And then there are the stans who show up everywhere, including your house. You need security systems, lots of cameras, maybe a couple of big dogs, maybe a panic room, and you've stashed a couple of guns around the house. Again, just in case. As rich and as successful as you are, part of your life is over. All because of these nutters out there who insist on getting to know you better, professing their undying eternal love for you, passing along a message, trying to rip you off, or are determined to cause you grave harm. I'm Alan Cross, and this is episode 56 of Uncharted: Crime and Mayhem in the Music Industry. And these are the terrifying stories of musicians and the stalking stalkers who stalk them. Stalking. Unwanted, repeated, and often frightening contact or surveillance by someone is a major problem. Not only is this an incredible invasion of privacy, but it's harassment, intimidation, and often threatening to life and limb. Of course, it's not just famous people that get stalked. This can happen to anyone. But music stars are a frequent target. This episode looks at instances of musicians who have to be on constant guard against some stranger with sinister motives that involve them. First, let's look at the psychology of a stalker. This is Dr. Jody Carrington, a clinical psychologist based in Alberta.
I think where we need to start is just in humans, because every stalker is a human. Every musician is a human. And what happens is that the two rules of this human race, regardless of age, race, religion, socioeconomic status, gender identity, is that we are wired for connection. And no matter how good we get at the AI, the only thing that will matter in this next generation is authentic interaction. And what I find fascinating about our attempt these days is to create connection to the people who admire our work, who enjoy music, can we create a sense of connection, of knowing through songs, through a gathered sense of yes, like that. So the intent is to create that connection. The hardest thing we will ever do these days, and this is the other rule of the human race, we're wired for connection, but the hardest thing we will ever do is look at each other. When we become public figures, when there is there's a cost to this. Is it fair? Is it not? I think that's the conversation that we need to have more often, right? Is that the more public you become, the more there's a side to this that allows you to be open to scrutiny, criticism, feedback, all those things. There are really people, those are psychiatric conditions where there'd be a delusion involved, where they would believe something that isn't true. And so that becomes a little bit tricky in terms of, what's going on for that person, and how do we protect then musicians these days in a way that would suggest, okay, how are we aware of the fact that right now, the vast majority of the population, 50% of all people would identify these days as feeling burnt out and exhausted and overwhelmed, okay, looking for some place to feel some sense of reprieve. And we would hope that the music industry is a place where people can land. The intention behind all of this is to create that safe sense. If I were to ask Eddie Vedder, when you write one of those songs that stir the emotion of people and allow hundreds of millions of people to come and spend good money to be near you, it's because you make them feel something. And what we're talking about is a very small subset of the population that goes into a clinical range where they believe they're connected to them. And so it is that subset that I don't think there's anything we can, this is going to happen in the world. How do we protect the people? And I think it comes back to, we could take it back to sort of like the basis of healthcare in, North America. How are we attempting to address connecting to people who feel really lonely and disconnected?
Many cases of celebrity stalking, most of them in fact, are dealt with quietly and privately, so we never hear about them. However, there are plenty of situations where everything has become public. Restraining orders, arrests, court cases, jail sentences, and occasionally somebody dies or comes close to it. For example, there's Chester Bennington's cyberstalker. She managed to hijack so much of the online life of Chester and his wife by hacking passwords, and it turned out that she worked in a nuclear weapons facility in New Mexico. Her story is covered in Episode 7, The Lincoln Park Cyberstalker. Then there's the crazy story of Ricardo Lopez, a pest control technician in Florida who became obsessed with Bjork. He sent her an acid bomb in the mail, designed to blow up in her face. Only fluke timing prevented Bjork from receiving the package. Lopez shot himself on video before the box reached her management office in London. Had cops not found Lopez's body first, along with all the videotaped evidence he left behind, the outcome may have been much different. I also covered that story in Episode 8. And the most famous and tragic rock star stalking is that of John Lennon. Mark David Chapman was an obsessed fan who had been fixated on Lennon for years. He eventually relocated to New York, staked out the Dakota Building, and then shot Lennon 5 times. Lennon was dead within the hour. I cover everything in Episode 29, which is entitled Unknown Facts About the Murder of John Lennon. On this episode, we're going to run through more tales of rock star stalking. They are frightening. And since we've already touched on a Beatle, let's talk about the awful week George Harrison had in December 1999. The first incident happened on December 23rd at Harrison's home in Maui, a place he had had since the early 1980s. It was a very private place, which is exactly what a musician as famous as George Harrison craved. On that night just before Christmas, George and his wife Olivia were elsewhere. But that didn't stop 27-year-old Kristen Kelleher, who described herself as a self-employed musician, from paying a visit. She broke into the house through a sliding glass door, took a pizza from the freezer, cooked it, and downed it with a bottle of soda. She then called her mother. Meanwhile, an alarm had gone off and police were dispatched. When they arrived, Kelleher was doing her laundry. When asked why she'd broken in, she replied, "I thought I had a psychic connection with George." She was arrested, pleaded guilty, and sentenced to 4 years in prison. During the trial, everyone learned that she'd been stalking George for years. 6 years later, in 2006, Kelleher's body was found in a car in California. With her was the body of another man. Both were dead of gunshot wounds to the head. It was determined that she shot first and then took her own life. The only thing George lost in that whole ordeal was a frozen pizza, a can of pop, and some laundry detergent. But a week later, something much, much more dangerous happened. Michael Abram was not well. He suffered from a complex delusional disorder related to schizophrenia since he was a boy, and somehow he became fixated on the Beatles. And he managed to locate George's home, Friar Park, a 100-room estate in Oxfordshire. Abram was from Liverpool and had been a very good student before moving on to a career in sales. He was married and had 2 kids. But the pressure got to him, and he started to abuse drugs, including heroin. In 1990, he had a violent confrontation with his wife and was admitted to a mental facility. This would be the first of many trips, and none helped. The drugs only made things worse. He became more and more ill. He had delusions, He believed he was the Archangel Michael. He'd listened to music for hours, sitting on an overturned flower pot. And by the end of the 90s, he was intent on murdering George Harrison because he believed God had told him to do this during a 1999 solar eclipse. In November 1999, he spent 2 weeks at a psychiatric hospital but was forcibly discharged when he attacked someone on the nursing staff. He didn't understand why he was there. "I'm not sick. Why are you keeping me here?" That sort of thing. Meanwhile, George and the rest of the Beatles had become much more security conscious since John Lennon was murdered in 1980. Death threats were nothing new, but Harrison, for some reason, seemed to take the brunt of it. There had been a stalking incident in 1992. Some deranged American tried to break into his house in 1996, and that same year he received warnings that his house was going to be firebombed. Why would anyone want to harm the gentlest and most religious of the Beatles? Security got tighter and tighter. Barbed wire fences, guard dogs, automatic searchlights, personal bodyguards. Any visitor had to consent to searches before being allowed into the house. On December 29, 1999, Michael Abram was seen in the area of George's house. He wandered into a local church and asked where Harrison lived. He eventually found out and spent the rest of the day staking out the property. At around 3:30 in the morning, this is December the 30th, Abram got inside the perimeter of Harrison's estate by scaling a wall outside the view of security, and from there, it was a straight shot into the house. Harrison and his wife were in bed and were awakened by the sound of breaking glass. It was loud. They got up to investigate and found Abram in a hallway armed with a big black-handled knife, a 7-inch blade. He wasn't there for an autograph. Harrison lunged, chanting the Hare Krishna mantra in hopes of distracting Abram, but it didn't work. He tried to grab Abram's wrists and attempted to back him up to the balcony. Olivia also fought Abram. She grabbed a brass fireplace poker and brought a two-hander down on the back of Abram's head, and then again. But Abram was so crazed he just turned around and knocked her backwards. That's when she lunged again, trying to grab Abram's crotch. When that didn't work, she ran out of the room with Abram behind her. Abram grabbed Olivia around the neck. But just in time, George appeared. Distracted, Abram turned, and that's when she grabbed a lamp and hit him in the head several times. By this time, security had responded, and Abram was restrained. It turned out that Abram had stabbed Harrison many times, including a wound to the chest that punctured a lung. Police and an ambulance were called. George lay on the floor, convinced that he was about to die. He was rushed to Royal Berkshire Hospital, but his injuries were so serious, he had to be moved to the better-equipped Harfield Hospital. It was bad. Doctors determined that George had been stabbed at least 40 times. One wound was millimeters from the superior vena cava, the major vein leading to the heart. Had that vein been nicked, he would have surely bled out and died within seconds. His lung was so badly damaged that part of it had to be removed. George spent 2 weeks in the hospital before relocating home to recover. He tried to maintain a brave face. He told his son Danny of Abram he wasn't a burglar and he certainly wasn't auditioning for the Traveling Wilburys. Abram was hospitalized thanks to the head injuries inflicted by Olivia. During his trial, his lawyer read out a letter in which Abram apologized for the attack, claiming that he had no idea he had schizophrenia. He was charged with attempted murder, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity and ordered confined to a mental hospital. He stayed there until July 2002 and was placed in a hostel, much to the Harrisons' concern, saying that they'd not been told or consulted. Abram insisted he was fine, as long as he stayed on his medication. The last thing most people heard of him was that he was working as a volunteer advisor for an organization that helped people with housing and debt. Harrison, though, never really recovered. The throat cancer he thought he'd beaten in 1998 returned. This time, though, it was lung cancer, and he had just 1.5 lungs at best. George died on November 29, 2001 in Beverly Hills in a house owned by Paul McCartney. He was 58. And those close to George believed that the attack permanently impaired his ability to fight the disease. More scary stories of stalking coming up, including one involving David Bowie and a big pink bunny rabbit. Crazed fans are a constant hazard for celebrities. Most are just excitable people who want to get closer to a star. And someone as big and as influential as David Bowie had plenty of people looking for an encounter with him that would be memorable. And that included a big pink bunny rabbit. In 2004, Bowie embarked on his reality tour, 112 shows through Europe, North America, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Australia. After a few gigs, he noticed something in the audience, a giant pink rabbit. Everywhere he looked, every gig he played, the rabbit was there. Bowie was amused more than anything. Maybe this was just some fun, absurdist Alice in Wonderland type art project, and he started to go along with the gag. And then one day, the rabbit got on the same plane as Bowie. Now, this story does have a happy ending. The pink bunny was determined to be a woman from Vancouver named Isabel Gunn. She was a superfan following the tour, and eventually she was invited on stage, given a tambourine, and allowed to sing a few songs with Bowie's backing singers. Now, this is interesting because in 1980, Bowie was allegedly the first target of Mark David Chapman, John Lennon's assassin. At the time, Bowie was on Broadway performing The Elephant Man, and Chapman had been stalking him too, right to the point of reserving front row seats for a performance on December 8th, 1980. But that night, the seat was empty. Chapman was actually outside the Dakota waiting to kill Lennon. Bowie remembered seeing the empty seat. I mean, how could you not see it? It was right down front. And when he heard the news, he was very, very shaken. Then there's the story of Squeaky Fromm. She was the member of the Manson family who tried to assassinate President Gerald Ford on September 5, 1975. Fortunately, her Colt .45 pistol wasn't properly loaded, and she was promptly tackled by the Secret Service. Fromm was sentenced to life in prison and served a total of 34 years. She was released on August 14, 2009. But a few months before the Ford assassination attempt, this is March 11, 1975, she was stalking Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. Just before a concert in Long Beach, California, she found the hotel room of Danny Goldberg, the vice president of Swan Song Records, Zepp's record label. Her mission was to warn Jimmy Page that she had had a vision of the future and that imminent evil was about to descend on Page at the show that night. Goldberg dissuaded her, saying that Jimmy probably wouldn't be available until the following night, and she replied, "Well, tomorrow night will probably be too late." Goldberg stood firm, and after a long talk, he promised to pass the warning to Page if Squeaky Fromm wrote it all down. Then hotel security took her away. We don't know what was in that note because it was burned and never read, allegedly. Imagine Goldberg's shock 6 months later when he saw her on TV as the person who tried to murder an American president. Singer Robert Plant had his own stalker problems. Her name was Allison Billings. She was after Plant for decades, claiming that she and Plant were in a relationship. She finally got a restraining order in May 2013 when her letters got so dark that the threat had to be dealt with. Over the decades, Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses has had so many stalker problems. Issues peaked in the late 80s and early 90s. Some were fans, and some were enemies. They took issues with messages in his lyrics and his public statements. The most persistent of these stalkers was Karen McNeil. In late April 1995, she traveled from Ohio to Malibu, answering what she called Axl's psychic call. She was convinced that she and Axl were husband and wife, and that she was able to communicate with him telepathically through what she called thought transfers. She believed, too, that the lyrics to Sweet Child of Mine were directed at her. The first time, Axl's brother turned her away at the gate of Axl's house. The next time, she managed to let herself in and found Axl in the kitchen playing the guitar. She was a big, threatening presence, outweighing Axl by at least 60 pounds. She was quickly removed, but that wasn't the end of it. A restraining order was filed in 1997, ordering her to stay at least 300 yards away from Axl at all times, but she repeatedly violated it. Axl was bombarded with letters explaining how upset she was about not being welcomed with open arms. There were passages about her relationship with a certain Kurt C. Probably Kurt Cobain, but he was dead, of course. In May 2000, Rose called the cops on her because she showed up again. She was arrested for stalking and violating her parole and held on $150,000 bail. On June 21st of 2000, she was sentenced to a year in jail. Axl's assistant testified that McNeil had been on Axl's property at least 6 times over 4 years, and the letters continued, even from prison. Since then, he's beefed up his personal security and often has to travel incognito. But Axl wasn't McNeil's only obsession. In March 2009, Metallica drummer Lars Ulrich filed a restraining order against McNeil, requiring her to stay at least 150 yards away from him and all members of the band and their families and those who ran the Metallica fan club. The details of what prompted all that are unclear. And Justin Bieber has also had problems with her. In October 2009, McNeil kept showing up at his place in California, and that required another restraining order. And around the same time, Justin Timberlake got a restraining order against her after McNeil broke into his house 3 times. McNeil's current whereabouts are unknown. Stevie Nicks is no stranger to being stalked. When she joined Fleetwood Mac, she began getting threatening email from people who accused her of witchcraft. It got so out of control that she actually stopped wearing black clothing on stage. In the 90s, she needed more security when an obsessed fan, someone who claimed she possessed spiritual healing power, threatened to kidnap her. Extra security and a restraining order seemed to solve that particular issue, but that wasn't an isolated case. She's had to take out restraining orders on other fans many times. Pretty much all of these cases were handled quietly and out of the public eye. And she's not the only member of Fleetwood Mac with this problem. Lindsey Buckingham was plagued by an obsessed fan for several years. The situation first arose in 2021 when a 50-something California woman named Michelle somehow obtained the phone number of Lindsey's wife. She called constantly, dozens and dozens and dozens of times a day. She also found the phone number of Lindsey's son, William, and pestered him with calls. He just ignored them. Michelle claimed that she was actually Lindsey's daughter, and because this wasn't acknowledged, she threatened to kill Lindsey and his family. She also blamed Lindsey for some kind of facial deformity she suffered as a kid and wanted money. She went so far as to create a collage of her face and Lindsey's face and posted it outside their house. There was all kinds of threatening social media posts, too. Police paid her a visit in 2022 and told her to cut it out. Lindsey, thinking that the problem had been solved, declined to press charges. But the harassment continued, and it took 2 more years for him to obtain a restraining order, requiring that this Michelle person stay at least 100 yards away at all times. That order was issued on September 19, 2024, after she showed up at his house, and the LAPD chased her away. But the real breaking point was a weird 911 call on November 3rd. Police showed up at Buckingham's house after receiving a tip that William, the son, was suicidal and was about to do something terrible. The caller even reported hearing gunshots. A dozen cops raced to Lindsey's home. They woke up Lindsey, burst in, handcuffed him, and left him outside in the cold morning air for 20 minutes while they searched the house. It took a while to sort out that 911 call was fake. And once it was determined to be a fake, it was easy to trace the call back to Michelle's phone. She seems to have disappeared, and there may be a happy note to all this. In 2021, Lindsey and his wife Kristen were planning to divorce, but because of all the stalking problems, they decided to put it all off. Glenn Danzig was saved from a stalker by his bodyguard on Halloween night of 2005. Some guy was lurking around Glenn's house trying to break in. Russ McKay, the bodyguard, spotted the character who then tried to run away. McKay couldn't tackle him, but he did manage to pull off the backpack he was wearing. When he and Glenn examined its contents, they found that it was full of porn magazines with cutouts of Danzig's face pasted on top of nude photos of both men and women. There was also a journal, and there was an entry dated October 31st. The note was, "Kill Danzig." But did this really happen? It was reported as fact in an LA alternative weekly, but Danzig has never commented on the case. More stories of stalkers and the musicians who fear them coming up. The more famous you get, the more crazies you attract. And if you're as famous as Madonna, you have to be extremely careful about the strange people who get some weird ideas. In 1995, Madonna was the victim of a very serious stalking incident. His name was Robert Dewey Hoskins. He was originally from Oregon, but was homeless, drifting from city to city. He became obsessed with Madonna and repeatedly threatened her life and repeatedly trespassed at her home. His claim was that he and Madonna were married. The messages she got was, if he couldn't have me, he was going to slice my throat from ear to ear. That's what Madonna said. Hoskins was also known to assistants and bodyguards because he threatened them too. The problems began in April 1995 when Hoskins kept showing up at Madonna's home in the Hollywood Hills. Things culminated the following month when he managed to get over the wall surrounding the property and then jumped into the swimming pool. A security guard was on duty and ran outside. Hoskins got out of the pool and lunged at him, grabbing for his gun. The guard was faster and shot Hoskins twice. Cops were called and he was arrested. Hoskins was charged with stalking, making terrorist threats, and assault. Madonna herself appeared at his trial in 1996, saying that Hoskins gave her nightmares. He was found guilty of felony stalking, 3 counts of making terrorist threats, and 1 count of assault. His sentence? 10 years in prison. Hoskins served his time and was released, but was in and out of various mental health facilities. He was arrested at least 1 more time and sent to another hospital. But then on February 3rd, 2012, he managed to escape from one of them, somehow managing to just walk away. None of the staff noticed. This prompted the police to issue a warning to the public about this dangerous, highly psychotic, their words, man with very violent tendencies. He was arrested a few days later in Long Beach, and we'd later learned that he was also obsessed with actress Halle Berry and was threatening her too. Since then, the Madonna case has been used to train law enforcement in the U.S. about the issues of celebrity stalking. Eddie Vedder also had a crazy person invade his home, something that was a byproduct of a genuine desire to be as open and honest as possible with fans. He once made a phone number public. He tried to read and answer all fan mail personally. Remembering what it was like to be a lonely, alienated kid, he made a sincere effort to personally connect with as many fans as possible. He did not want to let anyone down. That's a lovely sentiment, but there are always going to be people who take this too far. The amount of mail became unmanageable, and people began showing up at his house. Back in the 90s, he had to deal with a very intense fan who honestly believed that Eddie was actually Jesus. She also believed that Eddie had fathered 2 of her sons, and she maintained those children were the products of rape. After being rebuffed multiple times, this woman got into her truck and drove towards Eddie's house at 50 miles an hour, driving right through the wall of the house. She nearly died but survived. Eddie had around-the-clock security after that. A big fence was built around the house for added protection. Eddie has had several problems over the years, including a man who thought he was Jesus. If you want to see how these incidents manifested themselves in Pearl Jam's music, take a listen to the song Lukin. It's a 63-second track from 1996 No Code album, which is all about Eddie's stalker problems. It was written in honor of Matt Lukin of Mudhoney. When Eddie's stalker problems got bad, he would hang out at Matt's place until he felt it was safe to go home. If you're trying to make sense of someone who stalks celebrities, don't bother. Their motivations are irrational and sometimes psychotic. And like we saw with serial stalker Karen McNeil, these people can have multiple obsessions or suddenly switch to a different target. Johnson Wen might be in this category, although he's just an attention-seeking nut. Johnson's from Australia. He poses as an influencer, and his shtick is to run up to a celebrity and cause a commotion until he's hauled away. Anything for the clicks, right? In 2023, he invaded the pitch at a World Cup game just to give The Weeknd a hug. He posted videos of him making Katy Perry very weirded out, including a time when he jumped on stage during a gig. He crashed a Chainsmokers concert. In November 2025, he showed up at a red carpet event in Singapore for the premiere of the Wicked sequel, starring Ariana Grande. As she walked the carpet, Wen pushed past all the paparazzi and charged at her. Co-star Cynthia Erivo, a pretty tough cookie, blocked him and wrestled Ariana away. He was arrested, again, and charged with being a public nuisance. He was ultimately sentenced to 9 days in jail and permanently banned from Singapore. Meanwhile, Ariana had to deal with the trauma. Remember, it was at her concert in Manchester in May 2017 when a suicide bomber killed 22 people and injured hundreds more. I tell that story in episode 24 of Uncharted, which also covers the Bataclan massacre of 2015. The one thing most of the stalker stories we've heard so far have in common is that the person being stalked escaped being seriously harmed or killed. the two exceptions being John Lennon and George Harrison. Then there's the case of Dimebag Darrell. On December 8th, 2004, Darrell, the former guitarist with Pantera, was playing a gig at the Alarosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio. He was there with his band Damageplan. In the crowd that night was a former Marine named Nathan Gale. He was 6'3", 250 pounds, had a shaved head, and had been inspired to join the Marines after the attacks of 9/11. He'd left the Marines under unknown circumstances, although it's been reported that he suffered from schizophrenia. He drifted through a bunch of jobs: construction worker, working at an oil change shop, a landscaper. He also played on the offensive line for the Lima Thunder, an amateur football team. He loved tattoos, but the shop he frequented didn't like him as a customer. Too many weird vibes. He'd been a fan of Pantera and Darrell for years, and he was very, very upset that Pantera had broken up. The previous month, he'd begun telling a friend that Pantera had stolen his songs and he was going to sue. He also had this idea that Pantera had stolen his identity. He also talked of God telling him to kill Marilyn Manson. Friends knew that things were not so good because he was taking medication, possibly for a bipolar condition. On that night, December 8th, 2004, 3 bands were on the bill, and about 250 people were in the audience. It wasn't a great night. Even though tickets were just $8, the venue was less than half full. As the first 2 bands did their sets, Gale hung out in the parking lot. He was easy to spot because he was wearing a Columbus Blue Jackets jersey on top of his hoodie. When asked why he wasn't inside, he said he wasn't interested in seeing any crappy local bands. He would wait for Darrell and Damageplan, even though he didn't have a ticket. Eventually, a couple of roadies noticed him and told him to get lost. When Damageplan went on, Gale immediately scaled a 6-foot fence and slipped into the club through a side door. He moved past the pool tables, past the bar, and around the sound booth to get to the left side of the stage. At first, everyone thought he was just another metalhead looking to stage dive. Damageplan was about 90 seconds into the first song of their set, a track called Newfound Power. Gale got up on stage, pulled out a 9mm handgun, and went straight for Darrell. He yelled something, maybe something about Pantera, and shot Darrell in the right cheek, then the left ear, then the back of the head, and then his right hand. The audience was confused. Was this some sort of gimmick part of the show? Club employees thought speakers were blowing, or maybe some idiot had brought some firecrackers and were setting them off. Then the music stopped. Something was definitely wrong. Gale started shooting into the crowd. A roadie for one of the opening bands had his arm grazed by a bullet. He was a former soldier too and ran towards the stage. Gale was tackled by a member of Damageplan's security detail, but he was shot dead, taking hits to the chest, back, and upper thigh. A club employee who tried to restrain Gale was shot 4 times in the chest, once in the hand, and once in the leg. And a fan died when he tried to help both Darrell and the security guard on stage. He was shot in the chest. 3 other people were injured. Despite all this, a nurse in the crowd jumped on stage and gave Darrell chest compressions until paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. But by then, it was too late. Meanwhile, just 3 minutes after the shooting started, a cop named James Niggemeyer, who responded to a 911 call, emerged from backstage carrying a 12-gauge Remington shotgun. By this time, Gale had managed to take Damageplan's drum tech as a hostage. As Gale dragged the man to the back of the club, Niggemeyer opened fire from 20 feet away. Gale fell to the ground, dead. He still had a half-full magazine in his Beretta and another 30 rounds of ammunition in his pockets. He'd managed to fire off 15 rounds. It was 24 years to the day that John Lennon was shot. Putting yourself out in public can be exhilarating. Validation from fans makes you feel like you're doing something worthwhile, something meaningful. And while not all your music may change lives, you know that it's bringing joy and comfort to thousands, if not millions of fans. But you also run the risk of awakening an obsession in the minds of a few of those fans. The vast majority are harmless, but there are the dangerous ones. They get weird ideas, hear messages, create fantasies, and then act on them. Stalkers and obsessives are a fact of life for anyone who puts themselves out there. And the best thing anyone can do is be very, very careful because you never know when one of them might show up. Let's hear more from Dr. Jody Carrington, our clinical psychologist.
This generation of musicians is the first generation who have had access to social media, who have had their fans have access to social media. We don't have a script for this. So stalking of famous people has always been a thing. And it's a desire underneath all of it to connect, to feel seen, that through the music, through the attempt to make somebody noticed or feel some sort of connection to, it's worked. The issue is then now what happens with that, the access to that person, how deeply they feel connected to that person. And I think individually, as we see an increase in mental health issues globally, which is sort of irrefutable, there is many people ask me about a mental health crisis. And I don't think we're in a mental health crisis necessarily. I think we're in an understandable human response to a loneliness epidemic. So what's interesting is, the broad term of mental illness is so vast. If we took a look at individual cases, and so you've described, some of the musicians that you're sort of diving deep into, I think you would find something unique in each of those situations with respect to, like, do we have a neurochemical issue? Is there somebody that is paranoid, delusional, all of those things that sort of allow them to sort of disconnect from reality, that we would consider them having a psychiatric disorder. Those are sort of, I would argue, in the more severe end of things, because lots of people would interfere at some point because they're like, oh, okay, just a second, you probably can't hold a job, or you can't, there'd be other signs in their behavior that would indicate that, like, okay, there's something wrong with this person. So they may not then be outwardly, we would know something's going on. The higher functioning humans who sort of like hide their obsessions a bit much, like that people are surprised by, tend to be a little bit rarer. And mostly the underlying piece to that is that there is some sense of kinship. There is some sense of knowing and of acknowledging. And I think this is only going to become more of an issue because the accessibility that we have to each other as humans, it's becoming more and more difficult to hide. And in an effort to create connection, as particularly musicians who are globally recognized, their platforms allow their fans to have access to them, right? So where you're performing, where you're on holidays, where, what you're doing with your babies, what's happening in your relationships, all of those things are an attempt to create this thing that connects us all. We're humans. We want to know what it's like, what Taylor does behind the scenes, or Eddie Vedder, is he still cool? Like and most of their lives are exposed in ways that aren't fair. And so, much of my conversations these days is about, like, what is it like to be a musician in this place, in this time? What is it like to be a famous human? We used to be able to take days off, right? There was times when you would leave the studio, nobody could get you. That's one generation ago. I think about just even my dad as a businessman, he loved people right up to the end, adored them. I'm a 50-year-old psychologist. I want to throat punch people most days because we don't get a break from each other ever, which means the neurochemistry underlying how we operate is always on hyper alert. We always have access to feedback, and we're connected to our phones. I got a watch strapped on, which means everybody can access me at every time. And the neurochemistry behind that is every time I get an email notification or a watch notification, I'm sending myself like this. So that's the same for fans. That's the same for musicians. We are all in this heightened state in an attempt to continue to create human relationship. And it's only going to get harder. Vivek Murthy, who's the former Surgeon General of the United States of America, said in his last 2 terms prior to the Trump administration, said, listen, we are in a loneliness epidemic, and loneliness is far more than a feeling. It obliterates people's ability to connect to each other. So when we have the opportunity, it decreases originality, it decreases things like purpose and innovation and creativity. It just numbs that sense of, I just feel like I got nobody to connect to. And now when you can much more easily, as you said, back in the day, if I wanted to stalk the Beatles, I needed to have some means. I needed to have some capacity other than just listening to their music, right? I needed to be able to travel. I needed to be, or have some access to that. Now you don't even have to leave your house. The domestic violence research is really interesting in this same vein, right? Where there is a lot of conversation about when somebody gets so connected to an individual that they will risk anything, including their own life, to harm, to get to hurt. We've seen a number of examples, even on, people rushing stages, that has happened in the history of music forever, right? And you would think that, we would have everything ready to do that and it's going to be fine. And somehow this still happens, right? We still get streakers on football fields. Like all of those things sort of still happen. So I think, the desire underneath all of this is, and this is not a sort of a universal thing, because I'm sure we could find cases where this wouldn't be true, but there is the desire to be connected to somebody who has made them feel important or seen or special, which is the intention behind all of our work when we're in this creative space. And the hard part about it is that it will come with a cost. You know, I ask this all the time about people who struggle significantly. It's easy to sort of get mad at them. What's wrong with this one? What's wrong with this one? And what I learned early in my career is the thing that sort of changes, it does not excuse or condone behavior, but it evokes some empathy when we say, not what's wrong with this one, but what happened to this one. And I promise you, if I unpacked the stalker stories, none of that behavior is condoned, particularly when they hurt people. But there's something there that would break your heart.
You can catch up on all episodes of Uncharted by downloading them from your favorite podcast platform. They are all free for the taking. If you have any questions or comments about anything you hear on this podcast, email me at alan@alancross.ca. We can also meet up on all the social media sites, along with my website, ajournalofmusicalthings.com, which is updated with music news and recommendations every day. And it comes with a free daily newsletter filled with music news, opinion, and music recommendations. There's also my other podcast, The Ongoing History of New Music, which deals with rock music and alternative music through the decades. There are hundreds and hundreds of episodes you can enjoy, all for free. See you next time for more stories of crime and mayhem in the music industry. Episodes arrive every 2 weeks. Technical productions by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.